Hello and what is up, my friends? Thunderbob here, and tonight we are going to be talking about one of my favorite franchises of all time, the Blizzard classic, Warcraft. And tonight we're going to be... Wait a minute. Nope, not this one. Here we go. This is the Warcraft I remember. This is definitely the right game. Wait, no, that's World of Warcraft. Sorry, wrong game. Okay, this is... Wait. Hell no, this is definitely not what we're here to talk about tonight. What is this? Where did this come from? Why does this exist? Ah, that's definitely not it. There it is. That's the game I want to talk about. This is 1994's Warcraft Orcs and Humans. In this video, I'm going to talk about my history with the game and how it stacked up both at release and if you should be giving this game your time today now that it has been remastered. I've recently decided to play through the entire Warcraft series from the beginning, and I'll putting out full playthrough videos and reviews for each title as I complete them. In the last 2 weeks, I have completed both the Orc and the Human campaigns in the original Warcraft Orcs and Humans, and this video I'm going to be talking about both my positive and negative thoughts after beating this original game. Now to start with, my first exposure to the Warcraft franchise was actually Warcraft II on the original PlayStation 1. I was a console gamer growing up, but I was always the Nintendo kid in my neighborhood, so I largely missed out on the real-time strategy genre until much later. I had the Nintendo 64, but I had a neighbor who had the PlayStation. I can remember going to their house and seeing Warcraft II for the first time and being really drawn to it. I never actually played the game at their house, but I watched them play, and it really, it was a new experience. I really never played an RTS game. The gameplay was so different from anything I had ever experienced. All the units had voices and personalities. The cutscenes for someone coming from a Nintendo 64 really revelatory. And it was just a really fun and cool experience. It was a couple of years later when I actually got my first computer in Christmas of '99. And I can remember the first 2 games I got were Half-Life 1 and StarCraft, which is probably the best birthday I ever had. I got a new computer, 2 of the best games of all time. And then a couple months later, I got Warcraft II Battle Edition, and I played through the entire game. And at this point in my life, basically after playing StarCraft, playing Warcraft, I got Diablo 1. I realized if Blizzard's name was on a box, it was going to be a good game. That was a time where you could just, if they released something, you knew it was going to be great. And I was devouring every game I could find with their name on it. And after beating Warcraft 2, I decided I should go and try the original Warcraft. I found a 40 megabyte demo on Blizzard's website, and it took me all day to download it on my 56K internet. And I immediately hated it. I was so disappointed. And even though Warcraft 2 came out less than a year after the original, they had improved the game so much that it was impossible for me to play that original game and really still experience fun. Now, in hindsight, I realize that this is an important game in the history of PC gaming, but just 5 years later, it felt so antiquated because of the vast leaps the genre had experienced. You could only select 4 units at a time, and to do that, you had to hold the shift button. It was slow, it was ugly, but when you look at it for its time, it was pretty revolutionary. The genre basically started with Dune 2 in 1992, and was still in its infancy. Warcraft really refined the genre by adding things like multiple resource types to manage, multiplayer, a deeper storyline with rudimentary cutscenes, and also a killer manual. Really, have you ever seen this thing? It's literally 2 manuals in one for each race. It also really pushed skillful management of these smaller armies, which feels like the precursor to the micro-heavy real-time strategy and MOBA games that came much, much later. So the question is, should you play this game today now that it has been remastered? And let's talk about what has changed here. You can now select up to 12 units at a time. You don't need to hold shift to do that. You can double-click units to select all units of the same type. There's a rudimentary attack move, though I really would not rely on it, it's kind of terrible still. The game speed has been increased, the graphics have been rebuilt and improved, Though you can toggle the original. I know some people do not love the new look. It's kind of got like that mobile game kind of look to it. Almost like a flash game or like one of those fake games. But I think after playing through, it's really grown on me, and I don't know that I could go back to the original graphics at this point. Now, let's also talk about what has not changed, and things that I think maybe are missing, especially if you are playing modern RTS. These are quality of life features that I think they could have added to improve it even further. You cannot queue multiple units to be built, but rather you have to build them one at a time. You cannot queue up any instructions or orders, like telling a worker to build several structures in a row, or to start harvesting after they're done. You cannot set rally points for units after completion. There's no auto cast, and when you have several units selected, you cannot cycle through them to use abilities, but rather have to manually select individual units. It makes casting and using abilities a chore. Beyond the mechanical and interface elements missing, there are a lot of little things in the gameplay that can be frustrating. First, the human campaign is way easier and less frustrating than the orc, and I might suggest if you only want to play one, to start there. One of the biggest culprits is the invisibility skill from the human cleric. The AI will constantly send invisible units to you, and they always target your workers. Even if you park several units at your worker line, they almost always get one, and the AI is so bad all the other workers will flee across the map. Secondly, the mines always spawn far away from your starting point, and it's always a drag every game having to hunt down your first mine, and the terrible AI always takes the worst route. Speaking of terrible AI, you need to constantly babysit your units. If you send 12 units selected and send them across the map, half the time they're going to take 3 separate routes to get there or get lost along the way. This forces you to babysit those units and slowly move them across the map. While you're doing this, a single invisible unit will disrupt your worker line with little warning, and now your income has ceased. If you're lucky enough to get a copy of the manual, which oddly it doesn't seem comes with the remastered version, there is a ton of story in that manual setting up the game and all the characters and everything. The story within the game itself is pretty limited. There's an intro cinematic, and between missions there's about a single paragraph setting up the mission with some really, really awesome narration. The original version actually had some animation on this screen, but the remaster unfortunately was downgraded here, and it's just a static image for some reason. You'll see a few familiar names and locations, but there's really no context or explanation to anything, and much of the story has been retconned in the later games anyways. The mission variety is also very, very limited, and the objectives are always quite simple. You never come across any secondary or optional objectives. There's very few story elements during the mission, and I really miss the fun and unique objectives that the later Blizzard games added to these RTS games. They're very, very simplistic in this Warcraft Orcs and Humans, unfortunately. The unit selection's pretty limited, and for the first few missions you have very few choices. Even when they finally unlock all the units, you'll find that there's only a few usable strategies, and both races are very nearly identical, with just a few non-important stat differences and a couple of spells being unique to each race. Both sides have a melee fighter, a ranged unit, a knight unit, a catapult. The biggest difference is the cleric and necrolite and the conjurer and warlock, who have different spells that largely fill the same niches, just in different ways. I haven't played online because there isn't much of a community, but based on the campaign, I enjoyed playing as human more because of the spells that they have. Base building is also quite limited. There's only a few buildings, there's no defensive structures outside of the walls that you can build, there's no base expansion, so if you need a second mine, your workers are taking a long walk with terrible AI. You need to build along roads, which are very costly to construct, and limit base design, and the need to build tight bases just exacerbates the problem with unit pathing and harvesting from your gold mines. Nearly every building or unit feels just slightly too expensive, and getting your economy started is just painful. With the distance to your mine being really far, workers cost 400 gold apiece. Some unit upgrades can cost all the way up to 3,000 gold, and your workers only bring back 100 at a time. That's when they're not hindered by the long distance to your mine and the bad AI and the invisible harassers on the orc side. The base building economy and the flow of everything feels a lot slower than modern RTS games, in my opinion. Combat is kind of a mixed bag. It's both slower and faster than later games in the series. The units are very slow, a bit unwieldy at times. There seems to be a long delay between giving an order and an action being taken, and sometimes the units almost feel like they're getting confused if you tell them to do too many things at once. The units also die way faster than later games in the series, and you don't always have time to react. A catapult shot can take out an entire army, but since once you reveal the fog of war, you can see any incoming enemies, it's mostly a game of being alert for incoming attacks by watching the minimap. The pathing is mostly terrible, but that's also true for your opponent, and I found using a line of ranged unit and catapults, and then using a knight to pull targets into range was most effective. On the last few missions, the summons you gain are so overpowered. I just made a ton of conjurers and warlocks and spammed the summons at the enemy stronghold while standing behind a line of catapults. It took a few missions to click, but once it did, I found the actual combat to be quite fun and almost puzzle-like. You're using a limited toolbox available to exploit the enemy's bad AI or pathing and lead them into traps. Alright, so I guess it's time to circle back to that initial question. Should you be playing Warcraft Orcs and Humans, the remaster specifically, in 2024? Is it worth your time? And that's after we've talked about what's been added in the remaster, what I wish they would have done in the remaster, some of the painful points, kind of the limited story, the kind of bad balance, the limited unit selection, the annoying base building, the so-so combat. You can kind of get where I'm going here. Should you be playing this game today? To be honest, it's kind of hard to recommend unless you have a ton of nostalgia for this particular game, or the series in general of Warcraft, or you want to explore the history of the RTS genre. Even if you can look beyond the archaic elements, the limited story, the simple graphics, it's far more easier and accessible to just start at Warcraft II or III. That's not to say I disliked the game or the time I spent with it. Once I gave it a fair chance, I did have a lot of fun with it, but even with the added quality of life features, the outdated elements, the annoying design choices, it makes it hard to recommend you play it today. I would honestly, if you are coming to Warcraft for the first time and you don't want to be turned out on it, start with Warcraft 3. If you've played through the other games and you really want to explore and go back and see how the series began, this is probably the best way to do that. There's some things that they got wrong, but overall, I've enjoyed my time I've spent with it. I definitely think as a package, Warcraft 1, 2, and 3, it's worth buying. But if you're new to the series and you just want to check out the best, I would start at Warcraft 2 or 3 if you want the hero units or the more classical style RTS gameplay. I'm going to end the video there. I do want to thank you for watching. I do have a full playthrough on the channel of Warcraft 1, the Orc and the Human campaign. Next, I'm going to jump into Warcraft 2 and do the same, and then a review. And then I'm going to jump into Warcraft 3 and a review. This might take me, I don't know, a month or two to get through, but I'm very excited to play all these games. I do want to thank you for watching, and have a good night, everybody.